go into our planning with remediation, acceleration versus remediation. And by the session's end, you should leave with the start of your year-long math plan.
So who are we? So we started back in the spring with Edvestors as the Remote Learning Response Working Group. And we started talking about, we started our research to figure out how schools around the world were returning, but since there wasn't a lot of data on that, we sort of switched our focus. And we started thinking about how the gaps in our learning are affecting our students, who would be most negatively effective, and what steps we would be able to take to make our instruction the most beneficial to our students so they can't fall any further behind.
Okay, so our purpose. Today we're going to begin to dig into the curriculum to help narrow down what to teach, when to teach it, and where to start.
Right. And as we know, the students who have the largest gaps and are thus the most academically vulnerable are sent the furthest distance back. So this ties in with the CSLP that's happening within the district.
Great. Alrighty, so what are you most excited about? You could type that in.
Okay. I need to get on the Nearpod. Sorry, iPad. I can't split my screen. So I'm wondering if I leave and then come back in on my laptop.
Okay.
Can I do that?
That's fine.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
That's okay.
I had to do that phone call.
Oh yeah.
I'll be right back.
Turned out to be some bad timing with the home visits.
And go ahead and you can read through and just
Right. Maybe like things, getting back to teaching, trying some new tools. Yes, absolutely.
right now, not too much information.
Yes, student thinking, absolutely. Excellent. All righty. Now, what are you overwhelmed with? And I know that we're overwhelmed with a ton of different things, but let's try to keep it related to math. What are you completely and utterly overwhelmed with? Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. How to make it interactive, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm terrified about the whiteboards myself.
Yeah.
They don't work that great.
How to use the tech tools, not getting them too much at once, absolutely great.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Such trial and error for all of us.
All right, you might want to blow this screen up a little bit because I'm going to have you guys read it to yourselves and think about how is it going to relate to your math planning. Now that we just thought about what we're overwhelmed with, now let's think about how these numbers relate to our planning. Does anyone have anything that they want to offer or any questions about this slide?
It reminds me of when starting, I'll start my video too, when doing like the Edvestors Fellowship, when we start out and why Edvestors focuses on math, because oftentimes people talk about like reading data in grade 3 and predictions for that, but actually like math data is a prediction for where kids are going to be. And this made me think again, like, yes, there are losses in both reading and math, but the significant math loss, or the math loss is more significant than the reading loss.
That's right. I feel like it just drives that home, doesn't it? When you see these numbers, you're like, oh my gosh. Okay. Okay, next.
Anything else? Anyone else?
I was curious if you could talk about the middle stat. What does that mean?
The 1 year?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when they did this study and they looked at how much loss there would be in math because of the virus, they equated that 50% loss would be 1 full year of math loss. And so because they're coming back with even less than 50%, it's going to be minimum 1 year that they've lost. Just shocking.
Mm-hmm. All right, move on. Get to the planning area section, definitely. Alrighty.
All right.
So how can acceleration or remediation benefit students?
So this is where we're going to want to look at each other because we're going to discuss. So yeah, how can acceleration or remediation benefit students? And you can choose whichever one you want to talk about.
I think that because we've got so much work to do in moving kids forward, we want to really think about how are we going to move kids forward, so how are we going to accelerate and not just spend, I mean, like we could spend the whole first half of the year going over 5th grade standards as a 6th grade teacher, but then that is still going to have that issue of, well, we're still never going to cover the 6th grade material then. So while it's like very tempting to think about like, well, let's review, like I'll spend all this time reviewing, I think thinking about how can we still push forward and like accelerate is kind of my mindset right now.
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
How do the words make you guys feel when you hear accelerate, remediate? So Jara's like, you know, if we just spend the first half of the year remediating, we still won't be moving forward. So what do you think about when you think of those words accelerate and remediate in terms of kids?
To be honest, they both provide me with anxiety. Because even like accelerate on a normal school year, like sometimes I feel like I struggle with the pacing guide of like, it's always like, go, 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 go. And I'm like, no, we haven't gotten this yet. Or like, I want to dive deeper into this, right? And so I think I just need to reframe it in my mind. Accelerate means like continuing on with 4th grade, right? Like, and not trying to go back. And maybe thinking about accelerate also means like going deeper into the content to build that conceptual knowledge and connect it with previous conceptual knowledge.
That's a really good point. And I think accelerate for a lot of people, that's the word, you accelerate the car, right? So we're just going to accelerate through the learning.
Yeah, accelerate could feel also like scary too, like in a year when there's so many other factors happening in the world and no one's working at full capacity, and then you're saying accelerate, but like, so it feels scary a little bit in that sense of just like as a word in this context.
Especially with the numbers on the previous slide, right? That, you know, we said there was so much learning loss through COVID and the summer. And now we're asking you to not remediate and just keep on going forward and accelerate.
And what do you think that would do for the kids? So if we all opted to accelerate, which like move forward, as opposed to remediate, which is help them to miss their lost learning, what do you think that would do to the kids?
I think they really need certain basic skills. So I think we have to spend part of our time on those, just not do the full-blown lessons. And keep on with what we should be teaching for that grade at this time. So maybe acceleration just is you're doing maybe taking some of the lesson out. That, you know, like really trimming it down to essence.
And by essence, do you mean like the heart of each lesson or like the frameworks?
The framework, like to the standard.
Go to the standards.
You know, what's most important about that standard.
Excellent. Yeah.
So, thank you. That's a good point. Does anybody have anything to add for that? You guys have really good.
Yeah.
All right.
All
No
right.
more chance to talk. Go ahead. That's really Mary Beth dressed up. So does anybody want to change Mary Beth's mind based on just the conversation you guys just even had?
Ugh.
Sorry, cutting down a tree.
Matt, do you see anything? Calling you guys out since I work with you.
Oh, so they've seen this side of you.
Yeah.
It's like we're doing two things, and we're combining two goals into one.
That's a good way to put it. Can you talk more about that?
Okay. As I usually say, we're trying to play catch up to make sure that they have the basic skills, as well as to move them forward to the next goal.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And all
I think
right.
some people think that if we're accelerating that we're not thinking about previous years, and I don't think that's the case. I think people think we're just gonna like completely move forward and like forget past skills. But I think it definitely depends on like knowing your students and where they're at, and like you might have to spend more time like in a small group with students who need more reinforcement. But so accelerating doesn't mean that you're like ignoring previous standards.
Nice.
Mhm.
All right.
Excellent.
Remember that as we move forward. Remember what Jared just said.
Uh-huh.
All right. So Mary Beth, how are we going to do this? Are we taking to the chat, or were you able to create a Nearpod thingy?
No, I was not able to do the Nearpod with this, but I guess we can just go into
Yeah, we'll take to the chat.
take to the
So
chat.
we're going to give you guys 2 minutes to read through this slide, think to yourselves, and then take the chat. What's one thing you notice and one thing you wonder? And then after you type yours, go back and read through what everybody else said, and we'll touch on some things that we see that are themes. guys made really good points here.
Yeah, this is great. I like it. Yeah, it is. It's a vicious cycle, something that we try and over to break. And Matt, you're right. Like, we are teaching the most vulnerable students that this is referring to, and we really are, hindering their progress by remediating.
And Michelle, like, how do we make sure teachers know how to do this well so they don't resort to worksheets? That was actually where we were coming from when we started talking about this in the spring. Like, how do we make it so people aren't just resorting to, all right, here, you do this because you're not catching up to us.
Mm-hmm.
Which is hopefully something that you guys can leave with here today if you have an idea of where to start.
Mm-hmm.
That's true too. Remediation can be positive or negative depending on the teacher or the student. And it makes you think about what kind of remediation you're doing. Jara mentioned groups.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
could you do remediation groups while still accelerating?
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody want to mention anything that they noticed from what they've read, or did we cover them all?
Add on to anything, or yeah. All right. It's been some planning work. Move forward. All right, so remediation and versus acceleration. Matt, you want to read a remediation for us, please?
Sure. Remediation often focuses on drilling students with isolated skill that bear little resemblance to current curriculum. Activities connect to standards from years ago and aim to have students master content from years past.
All righty.
Read acceleration. Thank you, Matt. We'll call on you.
Right, all right, GC, read that for us, acceleration.
I love you.
I know you do.
I love you. Okay. I love you. Okay. Accelerate learning strategically prepares students for success in current grade level context. Acceleration radius students for new learning. Past concepts and skills are addressed, but always in the purposeful context of current learning.
Thank you.
So,
So now take about 30 seconds, because I'm sure you guys are already thinking about it, but think about be brave, please, somebody, and think about something that would be remediation that people would typically do in their class, or on the other side, what could be an acceleration, because that is one of the things that's coming up in the chat, like what could we do? And then just talk out.
Remediation could be learning how to subtract and borrow, okay? That could be, okay.
Okay.
Acceleration could be, you give them a problem where they have to think about, do I have to subtract or do I have to add? And see if they can actually figure it out and show you the strategy of how they solve the equation.
Thank you for being brave. Okay, so think about what you said. So remediation could be you're just teaching subtracting and borrowing, and I'm assuming in the context of remediating, I mean they've already learned this last year. Now you're starting the new grade and you're like, oh, they couldn't do it. Surely they couldn't do it. We lost a lot of time. Let me reteach this. Versus now you're moving forward and you're teaching almost like the comprehension of subtracting. Am I right? Yeah. So would you guys agree that that would be an example of remediation versus acceleration? Because you teach grade 3. So where in the curriculum does subtracting with borrowing come? Is that in 2nd grade? Is that in 1st? Because we all look like we're
4th
Well,
grade. Oh,
it comes in both grades, 1st and 2nd.
Okay.
but it's taught. This is, I think, your point made me think of like 4th grade. It's taught like you can have situations where you're subtracting and the numbers are borrowing, but the algorithm only comes up in 4th grade. And so students only learn, it's only a standard 1 algorithm in 4th grade. And it's making me think another example of remediation is like when teachers are so worried, they just start teaching tricks or algorithms.
Mm-hmm.
earlier than they should, or even at all, and therefore don't get the conceptual basis. So like an example, I see that sometimes with the algorithms often, like, and sometimes it's with parents too, right? Like families at home aren't sure how to support their students, and so they're like, I learned it this way, so I'm going to teach you this way. So it's like kind of this idea that if students are behind, they can only learn the algorithms, or I'm just going to teach them this quick trick. Sometimes like with comparing fractions, the butterfly trick, like, so I feel like sometimes remediation is just like focused on teaching a trick or an algorithm rather than digging deep into conceptual knowledge.
Good point. And think about too, like if we want to accelerate, so let's say they're in, let's say they're in 5th grade and they have a geometry problem, right? And you have a kid, because this came up with another group, you have a kid who still can't borrow and carry and subtract and do all those things in 5th grade. So would you just take that kid to the side and just that's his lesson or her lesson while the rest of the class is moving on to, say, geometry? Or would you make that kid responsible for the geometry lesson and then pull them to teach that on the side? Or is there a way you could combine them? I know there's a lot, but.
So I would definitely want to address the geometry. I want to keep them with the rest of the class. So the remediation would be, yeah, if I pull them aside. Sometimes I found I just have to tell them, like, just, give them the answer and just show them, just do it this way. Or do the algorithm for them. Like, I want to see how much they really understand about what we're doing in the geometry. And then I can fill in the actual math for them.
Well, is there a way that you could somehow get this child to be practicing this subtraction while you're keeping them accelerating with the geometry?
Because I don't want them to get stuck on that algorithm. I don't want them to get stuck on the addition and subtraction. If they can show me they like geometry, they can explain it another way. Like, in other words, if they have it, what we're trying to do, like if they could solve a word problem, but they just can't follow through with the operation.
Yeah, I could see that.
You know what I mean? So, I mean, I know I have to get them with the operations, but not maybe at that particular time.
And one way of looking at acceleration too, basing on what you're saying, is could you look at that standard, see what the major thing is? So for example, let's say it is finding a lost angle, right? So what operation do we need if we have 3 angles and we have to find the missing angle?
Right. So if
Subtraction.
you say, okay, I need to add these, and then I'm going to subtract this to get the answer.
So is that, like, that's one way you could move ahead with acceleration while still target remediating, right? Then the piece that is missing, but you're putting it in another context.
Right, because this child may understand that the sum of angles is 180 degrees.
So it's making those connections.
They understand math, and they get hung up on the actual doing the math of it. I don't know. I can't even be more specific, but it's come up a couple of times. They actually know how to do something one way, but it comes down to it. It is hard when they don't have the basic math facts. But drilling and killing doesn't do it either. It just doesn't. It's that vicious cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, Maz. And yeah, they understand the concept that you're trying to teach, but they're unable to, their fluency is not great, but
right. So like the times tables, how much have we struggled with them in way, 4th grade, trying to get them to nail them. So finally, I just give up. I just give them the chart. Say, just use your chart. Always, just use your graphic organizer. Use this. As long as I can get that, that's my remediation, I guess. Giving them the graphic organizer and showing them how to refer to it quickly. Same thing with a calculator sometimes. sometimes if they're having trouble keeping the numbers lined up, but they know what they're supposed to do, you know,
Mhm.
after strategy, the numbers lined up, or just use it. Sometimes.
Yeah.
Not always.
Right. Yeah, those special cases.
Just some.
Yeah, you don't want them to have those roadblocks and not move forward and lose their confidence if they're still struggling with the multiplication and the numbers, but they understand the concept. All right.
And anybody else want to chime in, or you're feeling like, yeah, that's what I'm thinking, moving ahead? Or
We don't have no choice but to move ahead.
that's true. And but by saying that, you're making the choice that you're moving ahead. So right there, what you said was powerful, because some people are going to still think, oh, well, this is what this is what we're supposed to do, but I just can't see doing it. Thank you, Shay. I just can't see doing it. But by you saying that, you're already a believer, and we do need to move forward. We have to move ahead. Sorry, Mary Beth.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So what does, right, is this me?
Yep, so Desi, yeah, go ahead.
So what does Desi say? We're going to focus on equity, so we're going to make sure everybody's supported. We're going to look for how our curriculum spirals, which is maintaining and supporting grade level expectations. So that's where the strategy comes in. Where did you see this before? And then we're going to utilize purposeful assessments all year long. So think about how you give assessments right now, and think about, does it make sense to have a gigantic beginning of the year test where you don't know if it covers everything and you might not get to everything? Or do you do small diagnostics throughout the year to try to keep up to date with the learning and keep moving forward? And I think I stole your slide, Mary Beth, but.
Right, no, that's okay. Just to add to that with the assessments. So if you're starting off with place value, you're not going to assess them if they know their fractions, right? So why give them this gigantic assessment if you're not going to even be touching fractions for months?
Right. Don't reach that until you do. Oh, I didn't steal your slide. This is yours.
Yeah, that's okay. That's all right. So let's use these guiding questions to help us determine where to even begin. Start off with, does the content extend from work from previous grades and into future content? Does the unit help students deepen their conceptual understanding, such as expertise with mathematical practices? Or is the content need to know right now in order to continue grade level learning, as you know, as the fraction example that I gave? Don't stress out that they might not know something that you're going to address later on.
Yep. And then you're going to see this a couple of different ways. This is the way that you can approach planning. And if you bring it back to your teams and have your teams do it this way, it's a really good, clear way of, what do I need to do to start planning for all of this mislearning and all this learning that I have to do? You have to determine the unfinished or the mislearning. And as my principal also likes to say, our missed teaching. Like, we had missed teaching opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
What do we think the students missed out on? We need to trace the math. Where did it come up before? Where will it come up again? Plan to address it. How are we going to teach this missed math? That's, I think, the trickiest part for everybody. And adjust the pacing, which I think Michelle also mentioned. When can you skip ahead versus when should you reteach or remediate?
Mm-hmm.
And this is what a typical scope and sequence would look like, right? You just do units 1 through 8. However, you could look at it this way. This is, everybody teaches unit 1, no matter what it is. And depending on your curriculum that you use, it may already touch back on things that you've done. So the curriculum that Jara and I use, fractions is going to come up again at the end of unit 1. So I already know it's there. Then you look at different units and say, where can I give a targeted assessment? Where could I recover something? Where could I do a targeted remediation, such as small groups, or say, you know what, I'm going to take 2 floating days right now and cover this because I just don't think they got it. And then throughout all the units, it says typical remediation is likely sufficient. So whatever you think to throw in small groups or pull a kid for probably is going to help them move ahead.
Right.
Is everybody
Like
clear
just
with that
now instruction, right? You see someone struggling with something, then you pull them, but you don't pull the whole class, so to speak.
like you do normally?
Right.
All right.
All right, things to consider. Understanding the big picture, you're going to diagnose and you're going to take action, much like we've done in the past.
And use your data. So here's that arrow slide again. We just want to know, as Marie Kondo would say, does it bring you joy? When you're planning, does your plan make you feel like you are going to reach all the kids? Are you going to figure out what they missed? Yes. Are you going to see where it came up before, where it'll come up again? Yes, that's the key. Then when you go to plan to address it, here's where you can go. You can go to Achieve the Core. You can go and watch these really cool progression videos. Even if you are in the younger grades, it will show you where you start with something, for example, the adding and subtracting, and how it deepens as the years go. So if you haven't seen these progression videos, they're awesome. And then when you go to adjust your pacing, you go back to Achieve the Core and use the coherence map, and the progression videos are there for you also.
And these are all hyperlinked in, so we're going to use those.
And then this is, yours doesn't look this fancy with stars, but this is what your math tracker could look like, and we provided you each with a math tracker. So your math tracker, so for example, Matt teaches grade 2. The title of his math tracker is going to say grade 1, and in parentheses, for grade 2 planning. So you go back and you think about what are the things that came up in grade 1 that were major standards. And you might not know what was missed in grade 1, like maybe you haven't been able to talk to the grade 1 teacher or the grade 3 teacher, but you know what the major standards are. So go and look at the major standards and trace where do they fall in your grade. And then you just, where can I address those lessons? And then how can I adjust that pacing? And we'll give you an example of this on your document.
And yeah, so you're anticipating where the struggles are going to be.
And that's it. Did everybody receive the email that I sent with the progression, with the math trackers? I sent it to you last night.
Oh, I didn't receive it.
Okay, so these are, again, they're all hyperlinked, so we can definitely,
And I can send them again too.
and here the math tracker links. If you just click on this one here,
Do you have it?
then it will take you to all of them.
So does everybody, can you see it on your own screens, on your Nearpods? All right, so you would put yourself in your grade, and then below it, we've linked all of the, we've linked them again. And when you scroll farther down, we've put the 2 slides that will help you plan, help you consider the things that you need to do that we thought would be important.